Hey, what's going on YouTube? Aura Storm here with another deck profile today. Now this is a new series I'm starting called Budget Deck Profiles. Now budget is defined, you'll see this in the playlist description. Basically budget is defined, you can get the entire main deck core for less than $100. $100 is a good baseline to start a budget deck. Now I will say, this particular deck does include Regeki, which is by far the most expensive deck in the entire card in the entire list, minus the extra deck. So I will say that you can replace Regeki if you so wish, but like I said, these budget $100 is not crazy money when we have certain Yu-Gi-Oh cards like Brio in the past year or Tour Guide in the past that have cost that much. So we're going to start with that particular baseline for the entire main deck core. Now I went on Amazon and did some math, and this is about $80 total including the Regeki. If you want to cut Regeki, you can cut your cost down to around $60. So anyway guys, with all the monetary thing out of the way, let's get to the deck profile. The also good thing about Gishkis in themselves is that I believe I did everything minus the Gishki Beast and Upstart Goblins in Hollow, and it came well under 60. If you want to spend, you know, more money on those ultra rare Upstart Goblins, be my guest, but Upstart Goblin is a common, they do the same thing. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's get the deck profiles. First off, we have 2 copies of Gishki Beast. This was one of the few, I think, other than few Gishki cards that was released in another set. This was released as a rare in Photon Shockwave. I think it's also got some Battle Pack reprints. I didn't really see that, but that's the highest rarity it comes in. Everything else is a hidden arsenal card, and as well as dual terminal, and the dual terminal ritual ones are also dirt cheap as well. So now we have 3 copies of Gishki Shadow. Not only is this a hidden arsenal super, it was just reprinted as a super in Secret Forces, so it is not difficult to find, very budgetary friendly. 3 copies of Gishki Abyss. This card is your Stratos, and it is a great card. It combos really well with Beautiful Princess. I'm going to talk a little bit about this card later in the video. Abyss, it's a great card. And the reason I run Princess is because Princess can special summon Abyss. And the main good thing about this is Abyss will summon in defense mode, because it's only an 800 body, and it's really easy to run over with, so like I kind of like it in defense mode. And I only run 2 copies of Gishki Vision. The reason I only run 2 is because I find that I'd rather search my rituals with Abyss rather than Vision, and I feel like 2 is kind of the ideal ratio. It can clog a bit at 3, so I kind of like it at 2. And of course, it's Gishkis. We got 3 copies of Gishkis Zolgigas. This is a great, amazingly good card. You pay 1,000 life points, you draw a card, and if you reveal it. And if it's a Gishki monster, you immediately target any card in the field and spin it. No targeting, nothing. So it can hit face down back row, it can hit field spells, anything you need. It's generic, amazing spot removal. So I love Zolgigas. It's a great card. It combos amazingly with Mound of the Bound Creator, which a lot of you probably, if you haven't heard of this card, I'll get to that in a bit. And there's 2 copies of Gishki Levy, I'll just call it Levy. Basically, what this card does is, this is a personal choice of mine. Most of the time I don't summon it, but it's another Gishki name, so if you draw it off as Zolgigas, the main reason you run this is whenever it declares an attack, you get to draw an extra card. It's basically free advantage. Now, if it's a Gishki monster, you can look at a random card in your opponent's hand, but you don't really care about that. The main thing you care about is getting that extra draw power, which is really important to any Gishki deck. 3 copies of Beautiful Princess. I believe this card was printed as a common in Duelist Alliance. Again, don't shoot the messenger on that. But it's a level 1 fish type monster that when it's normal or special summon, you can banish this card. So that means it's sort of like a rescue rabbit for fishes, except it is incredibly difficult to stop. Like outside of something like Solemn Warning or some kind of solid like effect negation, there's not a lot of ways to stop Beautiful Princess from resolving. And when it's normal or special summons, that means you can get it off of 1-for-1. It's a great card because it gets Abysses out of your deck, because typically they can be dead draws, so it gets the Abysses out of your deck and you can special summon it off of 1-for-1. Pretty good, really good card. It's a 3-of because I don't usually use more than 2, but you want to see it as often as possible. And lastly, 2 copies of Trag, because I don't run a lot of back row in this deck, and Trag is a level 10, which means I can use it as a tribute for a Zolgigas summon. It's not a dead card in your hand either, because it can keep you safe. It's sort of like this deck's version of Gore's, basically, and it's level 10, which is a pretty good number. And then for the spells, it's a total of 20 monsters. There's a lot of spells in this deck. I only run 3 traps. 1 copy of 1-for-1, it's at 1, and it's great in this deck. There's a lot of cool combos you can do. You can send Shadow and get your Princess out, and then If you have a beast in your hand, you can revive it back. I love 1-for-1 in this deck. 1 copy Regeki, like I said, this is by far the most expensive card in the main deck core. The cool thing about Mound of the Bound and Xel'Gigas is Mound of the Bound prevents your level 10 or higher from being destroyed by card effects. What this means is you can have Xel'Gigas on the board and Dark Hole with Mound out, and your Xel'Gigas don't go away. So if you feel that Regeki is a bit out of your price range, feel free to invest in a couple Dark Holes in its place. I personally don't own a Regeki, so don't really feel bad if you run Dark Hole in its place. 3 copies of Aquamirror. This card is amazing because first thing, the main thing is it's a ritual spell, but it recycles itself, which the whole concept of that when I first played Gishkis was pretty crazy. It recycles itself by it puts itself back in the deck provided you control another Gishki monster in your graveyard. So a lot of times the basic combo is tributing a Xel'Gigas for a Xel'Gigas summon, and then you can just recycle the spell back. So it's a really great card. The fact, just a crazy idea of a ritual spell recycling itself is pretty cool. 2 copies of Moria Greed. I do not run 3. I've heard from some Gishki players who like 3 personally. I think this card is sort of a lot like Magic Planner in that I only use it when I've got really dead hands, and I feel that 2 is kind of the good ratio. It's same thing, sort of like with Magic Planner, because you can draw more Moria Greeds with your Moria Greeds. So I feel like 2 is the ideal ratio. 3 copies of Upstart Goblin, pretty self-explanatory. Now, I will say, this is one of the few cards that, when I tallied up totals, I did not put in holo, but the Ultra Rares are $30 for a playset. So, you have those Ultra Upstart Goblins, they will work just as good as the commons, but the commons, are $4 a piece. It's a mandatory card, in my opinion, because this deck is all about deck thinning and getting to your combo pieces. So, Upstart is a necessary, and it's not difficult between Xel'Gigas' Gustav Max and Mound of the Bounds to deal that kind of damage. That's why Upstart's in here. 3 copies of Salvage. Salvage is a mandatory 3 of. I've tested it at 2. 3 is just, it's the nuts in this deck because being able to get a ritual out, then recycle everything that you just used to get your Xel'Gigas out is pretty powerful. The fact that it recycles everything, all of your Gishki monsters pretty much, except the rituals of course, are recyclable off of Salvage. So it is a mandatory 3 of, in my opinion. 2 MST. Pretty standard in any deck you'll see from my particular channel. I will play 2 MSTs because there's still back row running around. I feel that 2 MST is mandatory in any deck regardless of format. So I still run them at 2 MSTs. And then 2 copies of Mound of the Bound Creator. Now this is a personal tech card of mine. Mound of the Bound Creator, the main part you care about is the up top of the text. It says, level 10 or higher, that is Xel'Gigas monsters on the field, cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects. Meaning, your opponent can't, if you have Mound out, your opponent can't Regeki your Xel'Gigas. They can't target it with a card effect, which means no 101, no Castel, which is typically the way people answer your Xel'Gigas. And they can't do that. And every time a monster that's that level 10 or higher runs over a monster, the player who controls the monster that got destroyed takes 1,000 damage. So not only this pushes OTKs that much faster because it's not difficult to get multiple Xel'Gigas on the board, deal some damage, and Gustav Max for game. So Mound of the Bound, that's what it's here for. It's a great card and it keeps your Xel'Gigas safe. It was printed in Dragons of Legend and it's dirt cheap. And it is a secret rare, so it's a little bit more difficult to find, but you only need 2. And lastly, 3 copies of Royal Decree. This card was reprinted in the Secret Forces, so you can get it in holo for very cheap. And because a lot of people bought Secret Forces, these Royal Decrees are not hard to find. And Royal Decree has some other holo reprints, but I just get the super one because it's the cheapest of the holos. I believe when I did, and I will say before I go to the extra deck, the entire main deck core, with the exception of the Upstarts, and was bought in a holo style rarity. Of course, I didn't pick like ulti trags or anything because those are from a turbo pack. I picked ultras, but everything else it was picked in holo and totaled up to about $80. So that's the price tag. Now we'll talk about the extra deck. Now the extra deck, the reason I say main deck $100 is because there's not a lot I can do about expensive ultra rare or expensive extra deck staples because. Especially Exciton in particular, like it was $20 after the reprint. There's not a lot I can do about Exciton being a $35 card. You don't necessarily need it. If you have one, run it. If you don't, I'm sorry, you can feel free to run. There's plenty of other really good rank 4s you can run, such as 103, 103, Black Ship of Corn, etc. that you can run instead of Exciton because Exciton is not it's a good card, but it's not always necessary. And for now we're talking a little bit of extra. 2 copies of Gustav Rail Cannon Max. It's a pretty standard card. I run 2. You won't always make the second one. Basically, this is your cowboy, if you will. It's your win condition. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about this OCG exclusive card we do not have yet here in the TCG that's really good in Gishkis because you make rank 10s. It's called number 81. You probably know what it does, but basically it's like a rank 10 Felgrant, basically. If this was in the TCG, I probably wouldn't run these other 2 rank 10s. They're mostly just filler. So whenever we do get number 81, you definitely want to play it in this deck. But with that out of the way, let's get to what you can play. 1 copy of Sky Palace, Ganga. I would call it Sky Palace. Sky Palace is basically sort of like a Black Ship of Corn for rank 10s, except it can pop any card on your opponent's side of the field. So it can be any card they control. So if it's a spell and trap, and if it's destroyed, and you inflict 1,000 damage, but it can't attack. So it's sort of like a better version of Black Ship of Corn. I don't make it a lot, but like I said, I'd make number 181 instead. And then lastly, last rank 10, 1 copy of Super Dimensional Robot. This is basically like one of the biggest monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's one of the most difficult to make. You won't ever make it, but like I said, I'd run number 81s if they were here in the TCG. So basically what this card does, you can attach an Exceed material, destroy. It's a Harpy Feather Duster that they cannot respond to. So if this thing hits the field and they don't get it off, all their spells or traps are going away. So that's a pretty powerful effect. It's 5k beater. That's definitely nothing to be underestimated. Now for the rank 4s, 2 copies of Abyss Dweller. Abyss Dweller was just reprinted in the Secret Forces, so he is cheap as dirt right now. So like getting a couple, and in this deck I like 2 Dwellers because not only does Dweller has a second effect people forget about, this one right here, where it gives all your water monsters, if it controls an Exceed material that's water underneath it, they all gain 500. So in Gishkis, what this does for you is it buffs up your Zolgigises and makes them even bigger, which is 3,200 is enough to deal with. When you have a Dweller and a couple Zolgigises, that's basically game. I run 2 because I feel like since this is a dedicated deck that can make rank 4s pretty consistently with Beast, I feel that it's a 2 of. Same thing with Laval Chain. Laval Chain is a great card in this deck. It's sort of like how it is with Infernities, that Infernities benefit off of stacking stuff on top of their deck. So it's the same concept with Gishkis. You make this so you guarantee you'll get Zolgigis's effect off, because most of the time Zolgigis is a bit random. But with Laval Chain, I run 2 because it's a great card in this deck because it guarantees I will get my opponent's monster, I will get that spot removal from Zolgigis off. 1 copy of Castel, and also Laval Chain. By the way, Laval Chain was reprinted in Premium Gold, the Premium Gold 2, if you didn't know, so it's about a $13 card right now. Dweller's cheap as dirt. So 1 copy of Castel. Now Castel is kind of dropping a bit right now, last time I checked, but it's getting reprinted as a 10 promo later this year in the 2015 version of the Megatin. So if you haven't got a Castel yet, just hold out. Don't buy it because it's going to go down, it's going to tank like a lot. So Castel's a great card. It's great. You really need Castel nowadays with all these XYZs that get their effects no matter how they get to graveyard. Castel, being able to bounce a Dante, bounce a Shaddoll Fusion, and just put it back in the extra deck where they won't get the effect is pretty important, and I make Castel pretty regularly. And then 1 copy of 101. Now, 101 is not as good as Castel. I've said that many times, but 101, you'll be glad you have it when you run into that situation where your opponent is playing some deck that has a card that has that leave the field text, meaning something like Elemental Hero Absolute Zero, which I can pull that card up real quick. The biggest reason why 101 was originally so popular as well was because the key part of Absolute Zero, it says when this card leaves the field. 101 is probably one of the few surefire ways to prevent that effect from going off. Now the reason, another card that made this card so popular was a card named Gishkis X. Now you might say, Aura, people play that card in Gadgets, it's old as hell. Well, the main thing is it has a leave the field effect that special summons a level 3 or lower Gishkis from your graveyard. Well, 101 was one of the few cards you could make that would basically say, no, you're not going to get that graveyard effect. So that's one of the reasons why I still like 101, even in today's format. Plus, there's a lot of cards that you don't want to give your opponent it back, give the monster back to them right away because they're gonna just remake it next turn anyways. 1 copy of Evil Swarm Exciton Knight. Now, I will say this is the most expensive card in the extra deck by far. You don't necessarily need it, but it's nice to have it when you're down. Sometimes you will regret not having it, so I really like it in this. I really like Exciton Knight. It's a good card. One copy of Rhapsody and Berserk. The more I use this card, the more I'm really starting to like it. It is a great card. The main thing is a DD Crow in the extra deck. That's the main bottom card effect which you really care about. But you can also piggyback it on the back of an XYZ as an equip monster when you're done, banishing stuff from your opponent's graveyard, and make the monster a bit bigger. It's really nice. It's a good card. It's a good card, especially when we have decks like Infernoids, Burning Abyss, all these decks that, and even something like Nekros or Shaddolls where they have spells that they're just going to keep recycling. Rhapsody that puts in work against those decks. The quickest way to stop them from using their rituals and recycling their fusions is just to banish them. This is why I really like Rhapsody. One copy of Karen Gorgon Anti-Luminescent Knight. I love this card to death because it prevents my stuff from getting MST'd, because I played it quite a bit the most time I played in real life was during Next Challenge or Clee format, and I find that redirecting MSTs is always great. So it's a great card to make in case you're trying to protect something like Royal Decree, Mountain Bound Creator. It's a great card in combination with those cards. I only played 2 rank 2s. You make these with Abysses. Typically the way I do make them in my experience is just overlaying 2 Abysses on top of each other. It won't happen all the time, but I'd rather make a rank 4 than leave these little guys just sitting there. So what Sky's Cavalry does, if you don't know where this card came out, it came out in Secrets of Eternity. The first card effect is while it has Exceed material, cannot be destroyed by battle. Things like that are typically annoying to get rid of. And if you battle an opponent's monster and the monster is not destroyed, you can detach material from this card and return it to the hand. This is a great effect because it does not target, which means it can just go straight into battle with something like, say, a Yazi, and just send it back to the extra deck. Now, it can be destroyed by battle, which means it's not going to do anything if you try to run into, say, a Construct. But it's a great card against getting rid of some of those, annoying, you'll take a little bit of damage, but you'll send it back to the extra deck and not have to fiddle with it. So that's why I like it. And lastly, one copy of Gachi-Gachi. Gachi-Gachi is a pretty staple rank 2. It's a pretty old card, but the main thing you care about is all the monsters you control gains 200 attack for each material attached to it, and it has built-in protection effects similar to something like Mace Stroke. So the main thing I love about this card is that it gives, sort of like with Dweller, it makes your Xel'Gigas bigger, and anything that does that is great. So anyway, guys, I'd like to thank you for watching this video today. Really appreciate when you watch my videos. If you have another deck that fits into this particular category, meaning you can get the main deck core for less than $100 that you'd like me to profile, let me know in the comment section below. And if you like what you saw from this video, please subscribe. This is Aurostorm signing out.